Thanks.
Bob, this is a thrill for me. And I want everything about the next 30 minutes to be counterintuitive. Everything I ask you, I truly don't know what your answer is going to be, which is why it's so exciting. And I'm going to try to ask you questions from a completely different perspective from the networks and the cable channels. I'm not here to have you influence an election. I'm here to have you explain what you learned and why we should all pay attention to it. Rage is a devastating critique of the Trump presidency, particularly in the past year. Did you know, and by the way, for viewers, this is the penultimate discussion. You are, I believe, the best-selling author journalist of the last 3 decades, and virtually every book you write goes right to number one, and this one is no exception. Did you know how devastating your interviews would be when you sat down to write this book?
Well, I'm writing the book in the last 10 months while I'm interviewing Trump and other people, so it's an ongoing process. And reporting and writing a book is very hard. And of course, this book pivoted because I started the interviews in December of last year. The virus was not on the radar. I was talking to Trump about the presidency, his policies, North Korea, and so how he looked at his job. And then, of course, the virus accelerated, and it really is the first virus book. I think the last 40% of the book is about exactly what happened day by day in the outside world, other sources I talked to, and Trump.
You mentioned that things changed. Does the book look significantly different as you put it out, as we were reading it, than what you envisioned? Not just because of the virus, but that what you learned was so different than what you were expecting? Or candidly, did you expect Trump to say about what he said to you?
Well, you see, the process is it's like when you go into a focus group, Frank. You want to draw people out. You are in the listening mode. And as I followed your career, I think, almost half the time you are surprised what people are saying. So I am, if I may say this, I am listening, I am evaluating, and I am writing. So my expectation is to find out what happened. And this was a giant luxury for me to be able to call Trump, to have him call unexpectedly. I could plan out my questions even for a 20-minute interview, 40 minutes, and then what's going on in the world, what I'm finding out from sources I had in the Trump White House, the Pentagon, the CIA, the State Department, and elsewhere. So to the extent that it's a pure process, I think it is. I'm listening, I'm putting together, I'm writing. I have to go back and rewrite at the end, but it's listening. Here's what I found, and of course, Trump's voice in it is so critical to when Carl Bernstein and I were doing Nixon. We had Nixon was not calling us at night. Believe me, we couldn't ever interview him even after he resigned. So this is an opportunity, and what struck me is Trump was willing to be challenged. He would let me push him in ways I know his closest staff members can't even push him.
So I want to know more about that, because if Bob Woodward is sitting outside my office and I find out that he wants to talk to me, I'm getting on the next plane to Europe. In fact, Europe's not far enough away. I'm getting the hell out of this planet, because I know that if you're calling me, I've done something pretty wrong. How did you get him? Or why do you think he would talk to you? I believe it was 17 interviews. I think it was for 9 hours. Why would he subject himself to this?
Well, first of all, it goes back to the first book I did on him in 2018, Fear, in which I concluded without any hesitation that portrait of the first 2 years of his administration showed a nervous breakdown of the executive branch. He denounced the book and said it was pure fiction when it came out. A number of people who worked for him said, you know what, it's all true. And Trump was surprised at that. And so I asked for interviews, and he said he would do it. And he repeatedly says, oh, those are good questions. I'm interested in that question. Just last week, he said publicly, Trump said lots of great things in the book. Now, I let him have his say. There's nothing he said in his defense that I did not use in the book.
Did he know that you were going to release the tapes? Was that part of the original agreement?
No, but I went in, first interview, set my tape recorder, my Olympus tape recorder down on the Resolute desk and said, this is all on the record. I'm going to use it for a book to come out in September or October before the election. And he said, fine. I repeatedly told him, I'm recording these. This is for the book in September and October. A couple of times he said, oh my God, that's right before the election. What am I doing? And a couple of times he said, oh, that's great. I want the full story out.
And yet the full story is not necessarily beneficial to him. People can argue over the interpretation. But what is it for somebody like you? And you've been at the forefront of this intersection between journalism and authorship for 40 years now. It's got to be intimidating to put a tape recorder down in front of the most powerful person on earth and to know that you're going to analyze him. And it's probably going to be a critical analysis. What pressure do you feel yourself to absolutely, positively, without any exception, to absolutely get it right?
Well, it's a good question. Do I feel intimidated? No. I've interviewed presidents for 40 or 45 years, never Nixon, of course, and never some of the others. So intimidation is not the issue. The issue is, you know this in your focus groups, you have to listen to what is being said and then follow up in a very logical, aggressive way. Often I'm interviewed and they have a list of questions and it's all done, it's kind of talk by numbers, and they're not listening to the answers. I mean, you know this. So I've got the time. I know I can call him. I know he's going to call unexpectedly. He wants to do this. He said, oh boy, you're going to write a lousy book on me. You wrote a lousy book on George W. Bush or a number of them. And I'm silent. I've worked with CIA people, and you learn, let the silence suck out the truth. And so he would say, you're going to write a lousy book. I would say nothing. I would just let it go.
Well, I'm going to say, I want to repeat that sentence you just gave for the people who are listening to this, because it's really important. Let the silence suck out the truth. I know that silence is actually the loudest sound that you can make, that it is the thing that people pay the most attention to, that they cannot accept it, that they have to fill the void. And that's so powerful. So I promise to ask questions that others have not asked, and to put this in a different perspective. Tell me something about Trump that's positive. We know where you're critical, or where you let him tell the story that would lead people to be critical of him. Give me one or two areas where we should feel good about him as president, or we should be impressed with him as a person.
Okay, but first I need to give my conclusion, which is I think he is a tragedy as president. I think that he has failed in the two pillars that are presidential responsibility and uniquely presidential responsibility. I talked to in first interview, what's the job of the president? And he said to protect the people. With the virus, given what he knew, he failed to protect the people. We now have 200,000 people who are dead. Second pillar is to tell the truth. I don't think he realized the power of the truth when he told me, "Oh, I always downplayed it, so I wouldn't panic people." My sense, and I'd be interested in yours, Frank, of the American people don't panic if they're told the truth. In fact, after World War II, Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt went out and at one of the great fireside chats said, "Look, it's all bad news. I know I can tell you the worst, and you will not lose heart." And then he said, the very existence of the United States is at risk now, so everyone is going to have to fight and get involved. Now, ask your question again.
So we know where the book is critical of President Trump. Are there areas where he's either been a good president or where you think he's a good person?
Well, first of all, he has not had a war. And it's very significant that he's not had a war. I talked to him about North Korea a great deal. I have those letters, the exchange between Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, and Trump. And he said, no war, and no effing war, no effing war. And he's right. Now, relations with Kim Jong-un are not good now. We're going to see what happens in the future. Maybe they will get together. I mean, those letters are incredible. It's like, as I say, the Knights of the Round Table. They pledge fidelity to each other. They're going to trust each other. They're going to believe each other. And some of the things Kim Jong-un said, I remember standing with Your Excellency. He always called Trump Your Excellency. Trump told me, "Oh, he calls me Excellency." And Kim Jong-un said, "I remember standing at the first summit in Singapore, holding your hand, holding Your Excellency's hand." And it's a mutual admiration society, and absolutely extraordinary. But we haven't had a war. And Trump told me that Kim told him he was ready to go, ready to start a war. I report in the book that Secretary of State Pompeo heard the same thing from Kim. Pompeo concluded, maybe it's real and we have to deal with it, the threat, but maybe it's a bluff. I don't think Trump looked at it that way. He felt he had total control of Kim Jong-un, and that he could say to him things like he did in the second summit they had in Hanoi. He said, "You're not ready to make a deal with me." And Trump said, "I know where your secret sites are for nuclear weapons, and I want you to get rid of them all." And Kim wouldn't. He just wanted to get rid of one. Anyway, I served in the Navy for 5 years during Vietnam and saw the lies and untruths and the mistakes of Vietnam up close and up alarmingly close. And I'm not a peacenik, but I think any responsible person who can take responsible diplomatic action and avoid war is to be commended.
I want to stay with this idea of truth because in our conversations, you know that's been a focus of mine for the last few years, in search of it and understanding that our truths can be different, radically different, but they can still exist in the same environment. how do you know when someone is being untruthful to you? You've interviewed everybody in every administration going back to Nixon, and some of them are more candid than others. Is there a sign? Can you spot a dishonesty a mile away?
Well, sometimes if you know contrary information, but then what you take, and this is the luxury of writing a book and not having to do daily newspaper stories, you can check it within an inch of its life. You can actually, in the case of Trump, I would go back and ask old questions. Say, I'm not quite sure how you look at Black Lives Matter. And I finally laid that out for him in the starkest way and said, look, Black Lives Matter, this is a serious movement. The black people feel anger and pain. Do you understand that? And it's on the tape. Trump just mocked me. He said, wow, Bob, look at you. You drinking the Kool-Aid. You drank the Kool-Aid here completely. I don't feel that way at all. And you can listen to his tone and you can look at his back and you see at this moment, I believe he was speaking very truthfully. And I kept pushing him on this intellectual problem of how do you get, I said to him, look, my job as a reporter is to understand other people. I think your job as president is the same thing. You've got to understand people. You need to get in other people's shoes. You need to show what's in your heart, not just your words and so forth. We had a kind of, I mean, you've read through the book. It's a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine said you were the president's psychiatrist. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as that I'm not professionally trained. People have come up with all kinds of interpretation. That's fine. I'm after the facts and his reaction and reviewing them. And if I may add this thought, I think people in my business particularly have made a mistake when they say, oh, Trump is always doing abnormal things, against the norms. Trump was elected to go against the norms. I had a long intellectual discussion with Trump about this. Barbara Tuchman's famous book, Guns of August, about the causes of World War I. And she points out, before World War I, the old order was in a dying blaze. And on history's clock, a new order was coming. And I asked Trump, I said, you are, in 2016, the old order was dying. You knew it. I didn't know it as a reporter, unfortunately. I think lots of people didn't. He did, and he seized, in Barbara Tuchman's wonderful terminology, history's clock. He did. We need to accept that. People may not like it, people like it, but don't to run around and say, oh, this is not normal, or that this is on the Supreme Court issue now. They're saying that Trump and Mitch McConnell are hypocrites. What's hypocrisy? Saying one thing and doing something else. Mitch McConnell made it very clear when Obama put Garland, the judge, up for the Supreme Court, a wonderful man, actually a liberal, but a centrist liberal, the kind of people that should be on the court. And McConnell blocked it for a year, and everyone says, okay, now McConnell's going to put up Trump's appointee. That's not hypocrisy. That, yes, is hardball politics, but that's the way McConnell plays. That's no surprise. And people are wringing their hands saying, oh, this is unseemly. Is politics unseemly? I have no illusions.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I was so glad that you came up and saw a session that we did in Philadelphia, because you got a chance to hear from the voters that what they were concluding about the two candidates back in 2016 was not at all what the media was reporting. And that even people who didn't like Trump at the time were acknowledging that he was something different, that there was something refreshing about it. And I think that so many reporters missed it because, as you say, they don't listen. So here's another one that I've been dying to ask you. When Donald Trump says something that you know isn't true, does he know it isn't true, or does he just not care?
Well, if I know it's not true, I'm going to come back at him, as I did time and time again on every conceivable issue. I can't see. This is the nice thing. I mean, and I need to say it openly. Donald Trump gave me a gift. Said, we will talk. We will answer every question. There is no road that we cannot go down. And for a reporter with a sitting president, that is an opportunity. I knew I had to take that opportunity and exercise it in the interest of voters and readers. And so, getting into the people have come up, and I'm not going to go through them, a list of terms from the psychiatric manual for Trump. And I'm just not thinking that way because why? I'm not trained, and that's not my goal.
I'm now trying to figure out, because I know I've got 6 minutes to go or 7 minutes, and there's so much stuff I want to learn from you. Why does Trump refuse to apologize for anything? Why does he not acknowledge when he gets something wrong?
He did acknowledge he made a mistake in the Access Hollywood tape during the election. He apologized for that. I had a whole session with Trump down at Mar-a-Lago during impeachment where I interrogated Trump in a way that the Senate and the House was not able to do. And I said straightforwardly to Trump, you gave them a sword like Nixon did by putting out that transcript. And Trump said, oh, no, that was the most important thing I did. I said, well, wait a minute. It says here, you say you want the president of Ukraine to talk to Trump's attorney general about investigating the Bidens. And I kept saying, don't you realize if you hadn't put that out, there would have been no impeachment? Oh, and he would not hear of it. And I said, look, let's go to the language. You are saying, get the attorney general on Biden. And I finally said, do you think it's an acceptable policy for the president of the United States to ask foreign leaders to investigate political opponents? And he would say, no, it's not about Biden's, it's about corruption. I said, no, here, we had a shouting match about this. And I said, there it is. The Bidens, that's not corruption. That's a political opponent. He would not hear of it. So I finally said, did you ever think of apologizing? Apologizing can really work and put a matter behind you. Say, well, I did nothing wrong. I said, so sometimes you just have to apologize so things can move on for you. And I said, why don't you take Ivanka, your daughter, who's on your side, and walk on these beautiful grounds here at Mar-a-Lago and ask her whether you should apologize or not. And he said, look, wouldn't make any difference what she said. And apparently they never had that conversation, as best I can tell.
So it sounds like he's just not self-aware that things happen to him, that everything is transactional, that nothing carries over to another day, that what he says to you today may be something completely different the next week. The one that I really want to know, because you have said this in a couple of cases, and you can explain to me why Trump does this. He gives himself, in your book, he gives himself an A for his handling of COVID. And I know that everyone just threw up their hands and said, what the hell are you thinking of? And then he's holding out that he might still get an A+. What does that say about him? and about his understanding of where he is, what he's done, who he is, and where we're going.
And this was 2 months ago, July 19th, I believe, or July 21st, when we had one of our last conversation. And I asked outright, what grade would you give yourself? And he kind of ducked for a while, and I went right. I said, no, what's the grade you would give yourself? And he said an A, and then if he got a vaccine, it would be an A plus. Now think about this. At this moment, in the United States, there were 4 million virus cases. 142,000 had died. 142,000 had died, which he could have, a lot of the modelers and experts said, if he'd come forward and explained to the public what he learned on January 28th, the key date here, he could have done that. And I think it's two things. I think, and we saw this last week, where he had told me that he downplayed the virus, and then he said last week, well, I upplayed it. Now that's a word that's not even in the Scrabble dictionary. So up, down. I think he said of my book, it's a political hit job. The Fox News anchor said, well, is it accurate? And he said, it's fine, it's okay. And this is part of the tragedy of this, and we better really worry. He does not know what he is saying. He says contradictory things all the time, and it's impulse-driven, as we see time and time again in the book. So I think as we deal with the virus, which is a train that's moving into more disaster areas, it's not going away, it's getting worse. The experts say we better put on our seatbelt and our shoulder harness, because it's going to be a rough ride.
I know that you're doing a lot of these interviews, and I do want to encourage the listeners to buy Rage. But my favorite bookstore in the world is the Strand Bookstore at 12th and Broadway. And they've got a collection of most of what you've done. And I will tell you that before this interview, I went there. I actually went to New York on Friday, and I bought 8 hardcover different books that you've written to try to get through as much of them as possible. I'm going to end with 2 questions about you. Are you ever afraid that you get it wrong? You're dealing with very controversial subjects and with people who are still alive. It's easy if you're writing about something that happened 100 years ago. You're writing about stuff that's happening right now, and there are people alive who can challenge you. First, have you ever gotten it wrong? And second, is that a concern of yours?
Yes, it's a concern all the time, and I have gotten it wrong. I can. Do you have another half hour for me to list the things that I got? We made some mistakes during Watergate, which we should not have made. And the run-up to the Iraq War, I ran a story for the Washington Post before the war saying that people told me that they gave me very, very strong evidence that they could not say they had smoking gun intelligence, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Now, if somebody tells you they don't have smoking gun intelligence, that means they don't have solid evidence. I put it in the paper and didn't realize what I was saying or what my sources were saying. And that is one of the many immediate mistakes that I should not have made. Kind of one of the lessons is read and understand what you write yourself.
And I'm a supporter, and this will have to be the last question. I'm a supporter of what you do. I'm not just a supporter of Bob Woodward. I'm a supporter of a free and fair press, because you're the only thing that holds us all accountable. Me in the work that I do, everyone in the work that we do. But the press has the lowest level of credibility that it's ever had in the modern era. How responsible is the media for that low level of credibility, and what are we going to do to change it?
Yeah, I think we are responsible in part for it. And that is, we should not go on television or interviews like this. And if you're asked, did you ever make a mistake? No, I never make mistakes. Of course, we make mistakes. All people make mistakes. We need to own up to them. I think part of it is the tone, Frank, that there's a smugness and self-satisfaction that lots of people have in their presentation. And I read a columnist last week saying, if you don't realize that Trump's a scoundrel, you are not a decent person. Now, I know, lots of Trump supporters. They are very decent people. They are workers, they're financial advisors, they come from everywhere. And to scorn them or ridicule them, I mean, this is one of part of your great work, quite frankly. You're interested in understanding people, not ridiculing them or trying to persuade them one way or the other. And I think in the media, we have to really tone it down, be very careful how we sound. I've spent a lot of time writing about presidents and politicians, and sometimes presidents even, or vice presidents. I think of Al Gore, quite frankly. Al Gore did not know how he sounded, and he had the best intent in the world, but he sounded self-righteous and overly certain of what he is saying. People don't like somebody when they come out and say, this is the gospel. My book is carefully done. It's what Carl Bernstein and I call the best obtainable version of the truth. But that doesn't mean it's an engineer's drawing or that it's tape recordings of everything. And historians are going to come along probably quite quickly and improve on the version I presented.
Well, they need to take a look at your entire career. 19 books, virtually all of them #1 bestsellers. We look forward to reading I hope every year is another one for you. And I will just say to you very humbly that of the things I've done this year, this is probably the most special because I hold you in such high regard for your seriousness, for your ethics. And
No. You need to stop that, because that's part of the kind of, we're in a club then, and we pat each other on the back. I think that we need to. I'll tell you one of the things I wanted to do, and I hope you will invite me to one of your focus groups where I can go with you and listen to them. Do you do these virtually now, the focus groups, or? Okay, well, will you?
I've got one on debate night next Tuesday night. I've not opened it up to anyone. I'm opening it up to you right now. 20 undecided voters, only from swing states, and we're going to have them for an hour. And I'm going to put you with them so you'll be able to ask them questions directly.
Okay, thank you. See, this has been more than worth the morning. Thanks.
Guys at Concordia, I'm going to turn it back to you with programs like this and guests like Bob Woodward and books like Rage. You can't go wrong. This has been a privilege, and Concordia, back to you.